Hey guys, I'm Frosty. This video will go everything you need to know about Legendaries going into Shadowlands. This guide is based on the state of Legendaries from the beta as of November 19th. So this goes without saying, but the information in this video could be up for change. In the description, there will be a link to the written version of this guide, which will include a lot of useful information that may not be in this video. First off, let's talk about what's changed about Legendaries from Battle for Azeroth. It's pretty similar to how it was in Battle for Azeroth, but there are a few key additions to the class that are very important to know about. First and most important change is that Fell Devastation is now baseline. The spell deals a large amount of damage and healing, and synchronizes very well with the demonic talent. Another major change is that Revelin Pain, formerly an Azerite trait, is now baseline. This passive gives you a large absorb shield based on damage dealt whenever your fiery brand fades from an enemy. The last change isn't really class specific, but all your core abilities now are target caps, meaning they can only affect 5 to 6 enemies for the most part. Now that we talked about the changes from Battle for Azeroth, let's talk about the talents we'll be playing in Shadowlands. The talents you play are fairly up for change, and depending on certain scenarios and situations, there will be 2 talent builds that you will play. The first talent build shown, you want to play in order to maximize damage and mobility. It maximizes Shattered Soul generation, so you can output a lot of damage spending them on Spirit Bomb. There will be 2 changes that you'll make to this talent build. The first one is swapping between Abyssal Strike and Agonizing Flame talents. One isn't better than the other, and it's strictly up to personal preference. The second one will be swapping a Quicken Sigils in level 40 row. This will allow for you to reduce the cooldown on your Carrion Covenant ability, Elysian Decree, by 20%, maximizing damage if you are that specific covenant. The second talent build you will be playing is known as the Fiery Brand build. This will maximize survivability both on single target and AoE pools. Burning Alive will make your Fiery Brand, instead of being a 40% damage reduction to one target, instead spread to everything in the pool, allowing for the Fiery Brand to become a real cooldown. In addition, pairing Immolation Aura with Fiery Brand will allow for you to extend your Fiery Brand's duration on every target by up to 4 seconds. One of the major new additions to Shadowlands is a Covenant system. You'll have 1 of 4 choices: Necrolord, Night Fae, Kyrian, and Denthir. Your choice out of these 4 will drastically affect your gameplay. In my opinion, your go-to choice through dungeons will be the Kyrian Covenant. Both effects you gain from this covenant are very strong in every situation. The first effect you gain is Elysian Decree. This is a sigil on a 1-minute cooldown that deals a large amount of damage and grants you 3 Shattered Souls. This ability is very strong because it grants you a lot of on-demand aggro as well as souls to heal with and deal damage with. In addition, this ability works with the Quicken Sigils talent, which reduces cooldown by 20%, and it also works with the Sigil Legendary, which reduces cooldown by 2 seconds every time you press your Soul Cleave ability, which will allow you to deal a lot of damage. The second effect you gain with the Kyrian Covenant is the Summon Steward ability. Whenever you press this ability, it grants you 3 Phial of Serenity, which acts as an additional healing potion of sorts, and it also removes any bleed, curse, poison, and disease effects that your character is currently suffering from. This is very useful because you can use it to remove many bleed mechanics, like the bleed from the dogs and Hollow of Atonement from yourself, and you can also use it on the Necrotic and Grievous Affix weeks to remove either debuff from yourself. Lastly, you can gain benefits in the Necrotic Wake and Spires of Ascension dungeons with the Kyrian Covenant. In the Necrotic Wake, you can summon your steward and ask him to activate Goliath, which gives your group a large damage buff that is frankly overpowered. Other benefits include being able to grab hammers, anima spears, shields, and javelins in the Necrotic Wake. You can also grab spears in the Spires of Ascension dungeon that is very strong for the last area of trash, which is some of the hardest trash in the entire video game. The other covenant, which might be viable, is the Denthir Covenant. Both abilities you get from the Denthir are very useful in dungeons. The Sinful Brand ability is kind of like your class's Fiery Brand, but it is a dot effect to the target, which does a decent amount of damage to the target, and it slows their casting speeds by 30%. This ability is only strong when paired with your Metamorphosis talent, which spreads it to every target in the pool. The weakness of this is that Metamorphosis is your main defensive cooldown, so using it for offensive value feels like a very bad playstyle. The second ability you gain from the Denthir Covenant is the Door of Shadows. This ability is only useful because it acts as a teleport, which you can use to skip past things out of combat. This is only situationally useful though, because it's only beneficial outside of combat. You can use this covenant in the Halls of the Atonement dungeon to control gargoyles, which can solo an enemy, and you can pull them into bosses to speed up said boss. You can use it in Sanguine Devs to activate lanterns, and when killing an enemy inside the lantern's radius, it will grant you and your group members a large damage buff for the next pull. The most important system tied to Covenants is the Soulbinds system. This system grants you multiple character power increases, very similar to the Azurite armor system. You have 3 different options for Soulbinds: Potency, which grants you mostly damage increases; Endurance, which grants you survivability or cooldown reduction benefits; and Finesse, which grants you general utility benefits. I'm not going to go over each one of the 30 plus Soulbinds, but it'll show you the best endurance and potency conduits, as finesse conduits are way worse and should never be played. Also, in the written guide included will be the best pathing in my opinion for each Kyrian Soulbind if you want to know that information. First off, let's talk about potency conduits. The Repeat Decree and Growing Inferno conduits are the best for overall damage. Repeat Decree makes your Elysian Decree do 35% more damage as a second sigil. This adds up to about 5 or 6% of your overall damage in dungeon. Growing Inferno makes your Immolation Aura do a lot more damage and makes it way better for aggro. Repeat Decree comes from doing Covenant quests and can be upgraded by killing world bosses on release. Growing Inferno is acquired by farming the Necrotic Lake dungeon, and the maximum eye level is 213, which will come from doing the dungeon on Mythic Plus. Now, let's talk about endurance conduits. The 3 best endurance conduits are Vicious Ink, Fell Defender, and Shattered Restoration. The Shattered Souls healing increase is a must-have in every situation and the one you should aim to have. The Fell Defender, or Fiery Brand cooldown reduction, is very strong, especially paired with the Fiery Brand build. The Vicious Ink is situationally useful, but not as strong as the other 2 listed. These conduits are harder to get, but the lower levels can be obtained through world quests, while the higher levels of the Fell Defender and Shattered Restoration conduits come from killing Castle Nathria bosses. Another key addition to Shadowlands is the reintroduction of the Legendary system. Your choice of Legendary will drastically affect how you play in certain situations, and this is my opinion of the best Legendaries for Dungeon Stage in certain situations in which some of them are useful. The first Legendary I'll be talking about is the Defilement Legendary, also known as the Sigil Cooldown Reduction Legendary. This will be the best early on and for progression. You can do a crazy amount of damage in mob CC, like farming back your Elysian Decree quickly for damage output, or being able to get Sigil of Silence on a scary pack every 10 to 15 seconds. This will be the best Legendary easily for general utility and damage purposes. The second useful Legendary is the Fiery Soul Legendary. This will be the best Legendary endgame and your best option for overall tankiness when being paired with a Fiery Brand build. If you want to survive, play this Legendary. It gives your Fiery Brand a 40 to 50% uptime throughout a key, which is insanely strong, as it could being spread to every single mob in the pack. As the last topic of the video, let's talk about your cooldown and active mitigation usage. As a Thunder's Demon Hunter, you want to effectively rotate your mitigation and cooldowns in order to have the fewest gaps in mitigation as possible. First off, let's talk about your meta usage. Metamorphosis is your most important active mitigation as a Demon Hunter. It practically makes you invincible. You want to use Metamorphosis when you have nothing else to use and you can't afford to kite, or if you know that massive damage is incoming that you need to mitigate and their other spells won't be strong enough to mitigate it. Fell Devastation is your second strongest cooldown. Paired with the Demonic talent, it has a very good usage to gain damage and tankiness. You never want to sit on this cooldown for a large amount of time, and you want to use this early on into a pool to get ahead with Metamorphosis, and it's really good as an aggro button. You also want to use this button when you don't have a meta or Firebrand available and want to mitigate a hit that Demon Spikes cannot. While Fell Dev and meta, your average meta uptime throughout a dungeon should be around 13 to 18% in my opinion. Now let's talk about Fiery Brand. Fiery Brand is one of your most dynamic cooldowns as a DH. You want to use this cooldown as often as possible because it's your only flat damage reduction cooldown. On AoE pools, you want to use it either as an aggro button or use it very reactively. But this means if you see a casting off on you and you want to mitigate the damage, use it on the enemy. If you're playing the Fiery Brand Legendary plus Burning Alive build, you want to use Brand basically on cooldown because it gives you a 40% damage reduction on the entire pool on a very short cooldown. A lot of Firebrand uptime makes you a lot more tanky throughout the dungeon. On bosses, you want to try and save it for hard hitting tank abilities, but use it on cooldown if you don't need to save it. If used correctly, you should have around 35 to 50% uptime on Firebrand, with it spreading to every target. Demon Spice is your main active mitigation, and its cooldown is so short that you want to use it as much as possible. Outside of meta windows, you want to keep it up as much as you can and overlap it with your Firebrand. Pressing spikes during meta windows is a waste of uptime, so try and save them for when you don't have meta. Spikes uptime should be around 25 to 35% throughout a dungeon. Let's talk shortly about Spirit Bomb. If you're playing Spirit Bomb, you want to only press it with 4 to 5 Shattered Souls as a rule of thumb. You also don't want to spam it unless you solely want to deal damage. You want to use it early on into a pool for aggro purposes, while using it throughout a pool to keep up the Thrill TD buff on your enemies. Let's talk about your cheat death. While mostly wanting to try and save your cheat death, you can use it as a defensive CD if you're in other cooldowns to press and kiting isn't an option. You can also use it if you just want to man up and stay in the pack and know you most likely won't need it in the next 8 minutes. Lastly, let's talk about some of your general utility spells and how you might be able to use them throughout a 5-man dungeon. Imprison. This is an out of combat CC. You should also use this well in combat as much as possible to stop important casts if you know you won't need it to CC and skip a mob after the pool's over. Sigil of Silence. Use this mostly to lock down a caster. Try to use it when your group is drawing kicks. You can also use this when pulling a caster that might be far away to get them quickly to group up into the pack. Sigil of Misery. Use this mostly as a stop for important casts, but you can also use the spell to quickly CC a large group of mobs if something accidentally gets pulled. Sigil of Chains. Use this button to group up and stack mobs, but you can also use this as a stop, and you can also use this to slow an entire pack and group them up by 70% whenever. Lastly, I'll be talking about ways to improve your own gameplay and some tips to become better as a Dungeons Demon Hunter player. My first tip is learn how to communicate with your healer and call for their cooldowns when you need extra help surviving a pack. And also, learn how to communicate with your group well. If you're playing with a hunter, try and call for their binding shot if you know you need a kite. My second tip is be open-minded and willing to improve. Tanking is a hard role and you'll most likely make mistakes and die, but always being open-minded and willing to learn is the best way to improve. My third tip is watch other tank streamers and try and see some things that they might do and implement that into your own gameplay to make yourself better. My last tip is to record your own gameplay, watch yourself play, and see what you can do better. Also, analyze details or logs to make sure you're pressing your buttons correctly or enough. Anyways guys, that wraps up the guide. Feel free to tune into my stream at twitch.tv/34frosty and check out the written guide if you have any questions. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.